So another huge subject to try and cover in 25 minutes to half an hour. The unenviable task is going to be chaired by Ross Baglin.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Stephen. Am I on? Yeah, I am. Good. It was great and sad and great to see Patrick O'Flynn before. Among many things, Patrick was great in. He was the world's greatest fan of the UK rock band The Jam. And in 1977, Paul Weller, in their debut album, wrote a song called Bricks and Mortar. And he said, why do they have to knock it down and leave the site dormant for months on end? Who has the right to make that choice? A man whose house just cost 40 grand, he snarled. And 40 grand in those days was not quite as much as Paul Weller's house in Maida Vale, which is about 4 million today. But it was it was an expensive house then. The average house price was 12,000. If you escalated that 12,000 average house price in 1977, using the Bank of England inflation numbers, it'd be about 75,000 today. The actual average house price is about 250, roughly. Liam will know exactly probably what that number is, but it's about that. So housing is about 3 times more expensive in real terms, and funnily enough, that's about the same number as I heard people talk about with energy. So if we feel like we're being sapped, we're being sapped. We're very fortunate to have Liam Halligan with us. Liam wrote, I think, probably the magisterial book on the UK housing crisis, Home Truths, in 2019.
Pre-AI.
That's true. That's true. And AI basically quotes him if you ask. Liam has an illustrious career as a journalist in economics, in Russian affairs, and in housing in particular, covering the Financial Times, Sunday Telegraph, BBC, GB News, and Channel 4 News. I wouldn't probably mention that last one in this audience too much. I'm sure it went downhill after he left. The last thing that I noticed with particular note about Liam is that he was a housemate of Dominic Cummings in Russia, in Moscow, in the mid-90s. So he's not only an expert on home truths, he's an expert on house training as well. Alastair Mellon is our regeneration spokesman, as you know, and you've met him earlier today. Among many qualities, he runs a contractor developer, and he's built thousands of houses and apartments and skyscrapers in the UK. I'm told also railways and even a refugee centre at the time of the Bosnia War, which is before they were known as hotels. So he may have built some hotels as well. So in summary, Liam can tell you, how the obstacle course came about and how maybe to dismantle it, and Alastair can tell you what it's like to have to run through that obstacle course. So that's a great combination. Alastair, perhaps if you could just start by giving us a quick picture of, from a policy perspective, what's the problem here?
So if you go back very briefly on the numbers, through the 50s, the 60s and the 70s, the state built around about 200,000 homes and the private sector built about 200,000 homes. That started to curtail under Mrs. Thatcher and it stopped completely under Tony Blair. So we've gone from roughly, depending on good year, bad year, between 350 and 500,000 homes a year to now, in 2024, last figures I've got, 217,000 homes. Divide that by the average habitants per house, 2.64. You've got 163,000 of the 217,000 homes taken up by net migration. I don't think you can solve the problem. You can't separate the two problems from one another. So those are the basic numbers.
That's great, thank you. I'm keen we probably shouldn't get into too much of the immigration side. We'll focus a lot on the supply side here, but of course it's a supply and demand equation. Liam, not everybody will have read Home Truths, but that's right, they can be purchased at the, yeah.
Good books.
Do you want to give us a quick précis of
Sure.
What you see as the big issues and the summary of that book?
Thank you. The first thing to say is thank you for inviting me here. I'm glad to be here. I'm not a party member, but I am friends with William and many other people in your party. I admire your party for its emphasis on free speech. And particularly in a week like we've just had, I admire your party for encompassing and embracing people from different parts of the political spectrum. You have conversations with each other, you disagree, you do so graciously and you are an example, I think, to many other people across the country. So well done to all of you. I'd also like to say I was a good friend of Paddy O'Flynn when I arrived in the august parliamentary lobby as a plain-spoken plastic Paddy from North London, albeit with some pretty tasty education behind me. I met Paddy O'Flynn. There he was. He sounded normal like me. He had an economics degree from Cambridge, and he was incredibly clever. What a combination. And I'd just like to pay tribute to the film I just saw. Very, very moving. And also, I was at Paddy's funeral. It was an honour to be there. There was an astonishing range of people there, again, like your party, from all parts of the political spectrum. I didn't have a camera with me. I didn't have any recording equipment. But the journalist, the reporter in me, just took over. I asked his son, I asked Caroline, his wonderful wife, now sadly widow, and I began recording voices at that funeral, including your leader, William, including other members of your party, and people of all parties and none. And if you want to hear that, it's 25-minute little mini documentary I made about Patrick's funeral and about his life, and it's on my my YouTube channel, which is called When the Facts Change. I also put it on my Substack of the same name. I made that out of admiration and indeed love for an absolutely fantastic man, and I'm really, really sad that he died so young. The main problem is the supply side. There simply aren't enough houses. Since I was born in the late 60s, I'm older than I look, the population of this country has gone up by 15 million people, and we haven't built a single significant new settlement. The last one was Milton Keynes. As we just heard, we built 3.1 million homes in the 60s. That then went down rapidly to 1.5 million homes, 150,000 a year in the 2000s, and 1.1 million in the 2010s. We're doing even worse during the current decade. The Labour Party's emphasised house building, of course. If you look at the EPCs so far, the energy performance certificates as a kind of proxy of what the official numbers will say. Since July 2024, when they were elected, we're on 186,000, well below the 300,000 a year they're going to need to hit their 1.5 million target in this parliament. So far, almost all parties for most of my lifetime have emphasised the demand side, messing about with stamp duty, which is an absolutely outrageous tax, and also Help to Buy. Help to Buy was a complete disaster. All Help to Buy did was juice up the demand side of the housing market. It was only for new builds. It was a massive bung by the Tory to the oligarchic house building lobby, the big house builders. I'm not talking about the small builders, I'll come on to those, because they are the good guys in this story. So Help to Buy was a complete disaster. All it did was make housing even less affordable. And because housing is so unaffordable, as we heard, you've now got 25 to 34-year-olds. Back in the 90s, 65% of them owned their own home, and now only around 25% of them do. That's a major, major problem. There are more houses in this country now owned outright than owned with a mortgage, because the boomers have got all the houses, right? So that's why you've got a doubling of the number of percentage of people living in their childhood bedrooms into their late 20s. It's messing with our fertility big time. All kinds of numbers in my head I can talk about on that. Maybe we'll come to them in the Q&A. The problem is partly planning, but it's not even mostly planning, right? There are 1.5 million units that have been given planning permission that aren't being built. 40% of the planning permissions that are given in London and the South East aren't built. Why? Because the big house builders, the top 10 house builders, account for about 65% of all house building, though they're being really cagey with the numbers since my book came out. They deliberately drip feed the market, right? This used to be a conspiracy theory until I showed the numbers to Sajid Javid. Then it became, sort of Tory party observation. We can talk about what happened with the CMA inquiry that I suggested to Michael Gove that he did. It's a long, convoluted and actually disgraceful story, not by him. He was actually really keen on trying to smash our house building oligopoly, and it is an oligopoly. That was the word used by the House Lords Select Committee in its excellent report in July 2016. The big house builders are making 25 to 35% margins using basic Victorian technology. They're not tech giants. They haven't invented anything. It's absolutely outrageous that we let these monopolistic practices happen in our midst, producing the most important product in the country apart from food. So they are drip feeding the market. There aren't enough SMEs. The SMEs were wiped out by the 2008 financial crisis. Before that, they built 2/3 of houses. Now they build less than 1/3. Why are SMEs important? Not just because I'm from a long line of Irish SME builders, though that is quite important. What is important is the SMEs, when they get planning permission, they build immediately because they need the cash flow, right? But the big house builders, they get the planning permissions, they sit on them, they block the planning permissions, so the SME builders can't get them, so they can't actually build the homes that people need.
Just get one more point if we can, Liam, and
one
then
more
I'll cut
point.
to Alastair for a minute.
Okay, house building, a big problem is that we're not building infrastructure alongside the houses. There are houses going up, they're boxes, they're the smallest houses in terms of meterage since the 1920s. They're the smallest houses per meterage since the 1920s. There's no infrastructure going up alongside them. When you build houses, when you get permission, there's an S106, right? The big house builders flagrantly ignore the S106s and then tell the local councils, frankly, to piss off. Do you want the houses or not? The small house builders have to do their S106 obligations, building relief roads, building playgrounds, building sports pavilions, which makes them even less competitive, maintaining the big house builders' grip. What we need, as I outline in Home Truths, we need to use a very judiciously implemented land value tax. So that when planning permission is granted, it's not an option to build, it's a requirement to build within a certain number of time, and unless you build, you start paying council tax on the unfinished or non-existent units. Also, you have to, when planning permission is granted on agricultural land, the massive upside, the 200 to 300-fold increase, 200 to 300-fold increase, not percentage, fold increase in the value of the land is shared 50-50 between the landowner and the local council, not the Treasury, the local council. That then goes into infrastructure. The problem with this is that Labour took my ideas. I spent a lot of time talking to people on the Labour front bench. They twisted them, they contorted them into a Stalinish parody of what I was actually saying. And so I fear, a bit like Liz Truss, they've buggered up a good set of ideas for a generation.
Thank you. That's a great segue, I think, because that planning value uplift was one of the things that we brought across into the SDP housing policy, among a number from Home Truths, which is a good segue to the fact that Alastair's our sort of policy lead stroke spokesman on this subject. You've navigated the private sector building maze and the regulatory maze and everything else. Even now, private sector building is becoming harder and fewer in terms of housing output. What's at the root of that?
Yeah, I don't want to be on the other side of Liam's argument because I've got a lot of sympathy for it. But having been a developer and done you've seen them up and down the Thames, 1,000 units in a single. Those are the type of schemes I've done, and for sure, we can't get anything under construction unless we're selling off plan. And British people aren't buying off plan 3 years before the house is finished. That inevitably leads us to going overseas. We can't borrow the money from the banks unless we're minimum 30 to 50% pre-sold. So people complain that, well, these houses should be offered to British people, but British people won't buy them in advance. Yep. By getting sales secured, even with a 10% deposit, it's only then that the banks will lend us the money and we'll borrow 100% of the construction loan. So I'm not trying to forgive them, but they're acting under a set of incentive structures. If finance was available and then we could build 100% finance without having to pre-sell, then we could start a process of selling to British people nearer the time. So that needs to be, because maybe there's an angle for the finance side of it to consider. I think if we're going to look at the macro picture and take Labour's, what we always considered, and certainly in talking to William, really a disappointing set of ambitions to build 1.5 million. What we should be doing is we should be looking at the supply side. We make enough bricks in this country to build 150,000 homes a year. Right now, with 217, we're sucking in imports of bricks. So we need to go right back. We need to look at cement, we need to look at bricks, and we need to go to the training. We need to look at the education of carpenters, electricians, brickies, plumbers. The construction industry is wonderful because it takes, if you've got a shovel and a wheelbarrow, you can get in all the way up to a rocket science of the guys who are designing these 50-story tower blocks that you see popping up all over London. So it's brilliant for mopping up labour. There's jobs and opportunities. As we've seen, we've brought in an enormous amount of foreign labour. And one of the things that, going back to what happened with our legacy of North Sea oil revenue, it seems that a lot of our legacy of North Sea oil was to keep people on a waste tip and just pay them to do nothing. Yeah. And we've got to go back. We've got 3 generations now of people. We've got to pull them out of their sloth and living on benefits and ignoring those, because we've got how many millions of economically unengaged adults we have in this country who are British people born and bred in Britain, but we're not using their God-given talents we should be. And there's a huge responsibility to bring those people. And the construction industry is a wonderful place because you can start at the bottom and work your way up.
That's great, thank you. Now, I'm conscious William said in his speech that, you know, there was a time when interest rates and bond rates were 1%, housing rental yields and social housing probably 2.5%, 3%, whatever. It was a tap-in, wasn't it? What stopped, what was possessing these people not to do the obvious economic thing?
No, I agree very much with William and with your party policy when it comes to social housing. You know, I wrote Home Truths because I grew up in Metroland. I was the first, you know, my dad, who came over from County Mayo in the 50s, was the first Halligan to own his own home. You know, for generations we were sort of, you know, tenanted farmers. And so for me, home ownership was really, really important, and I wanted my kids' generation to have the chance at home ownership that I had. But in the end, more than a third of the book was about social housing because it was so important. As you said, Alastair, it was really important in the 50s and 60s in getting the housing stock up. I mean, in 79, a third of British people lived in state-owned housing or housing association housing. Now it's 13%. Higher if you include housing associations, but I do think the state needs to direct some house building because the private sector is never going to do enough. I think the state should be using its own land. You know, the state owns 7% of all freehold land. You know, you'd need 5% of the state's land, and you could completely solve our housing crisis with all the benefits that you're talking about in terms of you know, opportunities on building sites for people to earn money, earn self-respect, and build a family, right?
It's not just about
that's totally the story of you know, most of my 24 first cousins in this country, right? So I totally get that. When it comes to when interest rates are really low, I completely agree. We should have been securitizing. We should have been building homes for. There's always going to be, you know, a strata of society who are working hard and doing good jobs, jobs that don't generate enough money to buy their own homes, and so the state needs to help them subsidize their housing. We're doing that in a completely moronic way at the moment with a 25 to 30 billion housing benefit bill, where people are housed in, you know, privately owned, often substandard housing, almost Dickensian, you know, mold everywhere, people getting all kinds of diseases that we thought didn't exist anymore, and it's costing us huge amounts of money. Whereas if the state owned those houses, then it would be a much more efficient thing to do. Why did they avoid this tap-in? Groupthink and torpor. The torpor in Whitehall when it comes to house building is absolutely massive. And also, there's something which I identified in Home Truths, or I created, it's called the iron triangle of vested interests, why there isn't enough house building. You know, one of them is existing house owners. We can talk about NIMBYism if you want, which is completely rational, by the way. Another part of the Iron Triangle of vested interest that stops a lot of house building are the big house builders themselves. The third, to your point, is why I bring it up, Alastair, are the clearing banks, the big banks, right? 70% of all loans in this country are linked to residential property. And the big banks have got it in their head, and the Treasury's got it in their head, that if you build lots of houses, then the banking system will collapse. Because the real value is completely mad. But it's completely not true. If I was in charge, the banks, right? If you get a banking license, it is literally a license to print money. I'm not going to impose actual rigid targets, but there should be massive regulatory coercion on banks to lend money to house builders. Not absolute explicit direction, but there are ways to do it. Make their life really, really hard.
If they're not green paper.
If they're not, it's in home truth, mate. If they're not lending money to house builders.
We have five minutes. I just very quickly. One of my favourite SDP policies is the MOT on housing, which says if you as a landlord do not maintain a minimum standard, you're not collecting rent. And we would check that, and I think that's something with regard to that Dickensian mould-ridden housing that we desperately need. Alastair, we've got 5 minutes, so good to get one or two quick questions. In two sentences, what are the two or three big policy levers that the SDP could do to bring this home to people?
I'm in the danger of writing a green policy on a platform here. I'm going to try and pull one of Liam's points. He talked about securitisation. We've got a lot of land. There are other land we can CPO. We could build vast estates of patent book approved, pre-approved designs for apartment buildings, 10,000 at a time on new build estates around the edges of existing infrastructure and transport nodes or in new towns. There is an enormous demand from pension funds because rents and pension liabilities match precisely.
So that's a good one.
They would buy hundreds of thousands, and that would get the flywheel of housing going. That's what got us out of the recession in the 1930s. That was Britain's New Deal, and it could be its New Deal again.
Fantastic. Thank you. Right, we've got time for two or three. Oh, goodness me, we need another half an hour, Stephen. Sorry. Where do we begin? Alp, is it? Is that right? Yeah, I recognise your face. Have we got a microphone down the front? And then, if we could, please.
Thank you very much. Alp Mehmet, I'm chair of Migration Watch. I know you said no immigration. However, if I may, in the year to June 2024, there was an increase of 700,000 people in this country. The bulk of that, if not all of it, was due to immigration. You cannot solve this problem without addressing the inflow of immigration.
I don't think Liam agrees, but we won't.
I do.
If I could just add, 700,000 people, the average size of the family, we're told now, is around 2.35. That means needing, just for that, 300,000 houses or thereabouts.
I think you're in the right party for that, Alp. I think we're right with you. So that's great. The gentleman with the beard over here, if we could, please. Yes. Thank you.
Can I come back briefly on immigration?
Yeah. Sure. Sorry, I hope I didn't
no problem.
misrepresent you there.
That's right.
Hi, I'm guest of Matthew Murphy. I suppose I just wanted to get your thoughts on this take. Ultimately, a lot of people have jobs in major cities. So I know that we have a lot of space in the UK to, again, build houses, and a lot of people are hesitant to do so because they don't know if the public will buy them. Ever since COVID, we've seen that people can work from home. And if that's the case, then that means that people can move out and buy those houses and not have to commute to such far distances to the UK, to London and other major cities.
Yep.
But now we've seen a drive to bring people more back into the workforce, which may seem counterintuitive for people wanting to get houses outside of London and other cities, which are already cramped. I suppose I just want to know your thoughts on majorly that issue, so to speak.
Do you mean like the re-centralisation almost of working?
So, ultimately, loads of people are being taught to come back into the office, even though we've seen that people can work at home.
Yep.
We can see that in the future, more or less, more people have jobs behind screens. we can see that automation and AI is essentially removing jobs, of physical nature as well. So I'm just curious if you think that's counterintuitive for incentives to build houses, in empty spaces, so to speak, outside of cities.
Yep. I mean, you mentioned Milton Keynes, Liam, and that was our last, conurbation that was almost designed.
Sure.
Any thoughts on that?
Sure. So we have got loads of land. 2% of the land in this country, less than 2%, is residential housing, including gardens. The Greenbelt is 13%, and the Greenbelt isn't getting smaller. The Greenbelt has more than doubled since the late 70s, not least because councils keep adding to it. Alastair's right. Every recession in this country that the UK's recovered from over the last 120 years, every recovery from recession has been associated with a sharp increase in house building, except the recovery from the 2008-9 recessions after the global financial crisis. And it's been the most lukewarm, unconvincing recovery from recession that we've ever seen. When it comes to immigration, so when I wrote Home Truths in 2016, 2017, my view was that a lot of, we need the immigrants to build the houses, right? Not surprising given the background where I came from. Then immigration peaked at 323, that sparked Brexit, and I thought there's no way that must be the peak, and if that was the peak, then maybe things would be different. But when the facts change, I changed my mind, as Maynard Keynes says. That's why my Substack's called that. And the facts have changed. And Alf, I'm afraid, not afraid in this context, is absolutely right. You cannot solve this problem without tackling immigration. But the way to tackle it now is to build the houses to meet the people that we have. And you need more modular, you need more self-build, you need the state to mobilise its own land, we need to mobilise the pension funds and the banks and so on. There are ways to do this, but the vested interests stopping us doing this are so powerful, they need to be called out. And by the way, the second biggest lobby in the country when it comes to giving governments money are the house builders.
Thank you. Have we got time for one more, Stephen, I think you said? We are done? Yeah, I thought we might. Very sorry, I was going to go to you. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, all the people that are not buying houses.
Thank you for having me.